What happens when Hollywood's most respected veteran actor comes face to face with a talk show host who pushes one button too many? You won't believe what unfolds when Samuel L. Jackson sits down for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview, only to find himself trapped in a verbal battlefield that would leave audiences stunned and social media exploding with outrage. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when two entertainment titans clash in the most shocking late-night confrontation ever captured on live television. The studio audience was buzzing with anticipation as Samuel L. Jackson made his entrance onto the Jimmy Kimmel live stage, his signature confident stride carrying him toward the guest chair. The legendary actor, known for his commanding presence and no-nonsense attitude, had appeared on countless talk shows throughout his illustrious career, but nothing could have prepared him for what was about to transpire under the bright studio. Lights. Jimmy Kimmel, flashing his trademark grin, welcomed Jackson with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm. "Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Samuel L. Jackson." The audience erupted in applause as Jackson settled into his chair, adjusting his jacket with the practiced ease of someone who had done this dance 1,000 times before. But experienced viewers might have noticed something different in Kimmel's demeanor. A slight edge to his smile, a glint in his eyes that suggested this wasn't going to be your typical promotional interview. "Samuel, great to have you back on the show," Kimmel began, his voice carrying that familiar conversational tone that had made him a late-night staple. "I have to say, you look fantastic for someone who's been in this business for decades. What's your secret?" Jackson raised an eyebrow at the comment, his expression remaining neutral but his eyes sharpening slightly. "Well, Jimmy, I guess staying active, eating right, and not letting people waste my time keeps me young." The response drew a chuckle from the audience, but there was an underlying tension in Jackson's voice that suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with the age-related opening. Kimmel's smile widened, but something shifted in his posture. "Speaking of time, I was looking at your filmography earlier, and I noticed something interesting. You've been in, over 150 films? That's impressive, but I couldn't help but wonder, do you ever feel like you've said yes to too many projects? I mean, some of those movies." He trailed off with a theatrical shrug that drew a few uncomfortable laughs from the audience. The studio fell noticeably quieter as Jackson's jaw tightened. His fingers drummed once against the armrest of his chair, a subtle tell that those who knew him would recognize as a warning sign. "Jimmy, I'm curious about something. Did you actually watch any of those films, or are you just reading off some intern's notes?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Kimmel's practiced smile flickered for just a moment. "Oh, I've seen plenty of your work, Samuel. I'm just saying, for an actor of your caliber, some of those choices seem interesting. Like that superhero movie where you basically played the same character you always play, but with an eye patch." Jackson leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to that dangerously quiet tone that had intimidated countless co-stars and directors over the years. "The same character I always play? That's interesting coming from someone who's been telling the same jokes for 15 years. The audience shifted uncomfortably, sensing the temperature in the room dropping several degrees. Kimmel laughed, but it sounded forced now, lacking the natural rhythm that usually carried his show. "Hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? But seriously, Samuel, don't you think there's something to be said for challenging yourself artistically instead of just cashing checks?" Jackson's eyes narrowed, and veteran talk show watchers could see the storm clouds gathering. "Cashing checks? Jimmy, let me ask you something. When was the last time you challenged yourself? When was the last time you did anything that didn't involve reading cue cards and kissing celebrity ass for ratings?" The studio audience gasped audibly, and several people in the front row exchanged shocked glances. This was not the playful banter they had come to expect from late-night television. Kimmel's face flushed slightly, but he pressed forward with what seemed like deliberate intent to provoke. "Well, at least I'm not in every other movie that comes out, playing angry tough guys who solve problems by yelling louder than everyone else in the room," Kimmel shot back, his voice taking on an edge that his regular viewers rarely heard. "I mean, how many times can you say, 'I'm tired of these,' before it gets old?" Jackson's entire demeanor shifted in that moment, his body language transforming from cautious annoyance to barely contained fury. The legendary actor's voice remained eerily calm, but everyone in the studio could feel the electricity in the air. "You want to talk about getting old, Jimmy? Let's talk about a middle-aged man whose biggest claim to fame is making fun of people who actually have talent." The camera operators scrambled to capture every angle of the escalating confrontation, while the studio audience sat in stunned silence. Even the usually animated crowd seemed to understand they were witnessing something unprecedented in late-night television history. Kimmel's composure was cracking, his face reddening as he leaned back in his chair. "You know what, Samuel? I think you're taking this a little too seriously. We're just having a conversation here." "A conversation?" Jackson's voice rose for the first time, cutting through the studio like a blade. "You call ambushing someone with backhanded insults a conversation? You brought me here under false pretenses, thinking you could embarrass me for your little comedy show, and now you want to play innocent?" The tension in the studio was palpable now, with crew members visible in the background, looking nervously at each other, clearly unsure whether to continue filming or intervene. Kimmel's producers could be seen frantically gesturing from the wings, but their host seemed determined to push forward down this destructive path. "Look, Samuel, I think you're misunderstanding the format here," Kimmel said, his voice carrying a condescending tone that made several audience members visibly cringe. "This is comedy. This is what we do. We joke around, we have fun, we don't take everything so seriously." Jackson stood up slowly, his full height making him an imposing figure, under the studio lights. "You call disrespecting someone's life work comedy? You think insulting a guest on your show is entertainment?" His voice carried the weight of decades in Hollywood, the authority of someone who had earned every bit of respect he commanded. The audience was completely silent now, some people covering their mouths in shock, others pulling out their phones to capture what they instinctively knew was about to become viral content. The camera crew continued rolling, capturing every moment of what was rapidly becoming the most explosive talk show confrontation in recent memory. Kimmel remained seated, but his body language had shifted to defensive mode. "Samuel, please sit down. We can work this out. This doesn't have to get ugly." But Jackson wasn't finished, and as he looked down at the talk show host who had clearly bitten off more than he could chew, it became obvious that this confrontation was only just beginning. The veteran actor's eyes blazed with an intensity that suggested the worst was yet to come, and everyone in that studio knew they were about to witness something that would change late-night television forever. Jackson's voice cut through the studio silence like a razor. "You want to know what's really funny, Jimmy? A grown man who built his career on other people's misery, thinking he can take shots at legends and call it entertainment. The actors." Words carried decades of Hollywood experience, each syllable delivered with surgical precision that left no doubt about his complete disdain for what was happening. Kimmel shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his earlier bravado evaporating under Jackson's withering stare. "Samuel, come on, let's just calm down here. The audience came here to have a good time, not to watch us argue." "Don't you dare use that audience as a shield," Jackson fired back, his voice rising with controlled fury. "You brought me here knowing exactly what you planned to do. You thought you could make me look like some washed-up actor desperate for work, didn't you? You figured the great Samuel L. Jackson would just sit there and take your little insults with a smile?" The studio audience was riveted, many leaning forward in their seats as they witnessed something completely unprecedented in late-night television. Phone cameras were everywhere now, capturing every moment of the escalating confrontation. Even the studio crew seemed frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let this train wreck continue to unfold. Kimmel's face was flushed red now, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead under the hot studio lights. "Look, Samuel, I think you're completely overreacting here. This is how talk shows work. We joke, we kid around, it's all in good fun." "Good fun?" Jackson's laugh was cold and humorless. "You call questioning my artistic integrity good fun? You call suggesting I'm some kind of sellout good fun? Jimmy, let me tell you something about good fun. It doesn't involve humiliating your guests on national television." The tension in the studio was becoming unbearable. Audience members were looking around nervously, some beginning to whisper to each other, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this interview had taken. The camera operators continued filming, capturing every angle of what was rapidly becoming the most explosive television moment in years. Kimmel tried to regain control of the situation, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow and desperate. "Samuel, you're a tough guy in the movies, but this is real life. We don't need to turn this into some kind of dramatic scene." That comment was the spark that lit the fuse. Jackson's eyes flashed dangerously, and his voice dropped to that menacing whisper that had made him famous in countless films. "Dramatic scene? You think this is acting, Jimmy? You think I'm putting on some kind of show for your cameras?" The veteran actor took a step closer to Kimmel's desk, his imposing presence filling the space between them. "Let me make something crystal clear to you and everyone watching. This isn't Samuel L. Jackson, the actor, talking right now. This is Samuel L. Jackson, the man, and this man is tired of being disrespected by some two-bit comedian who thinks he can tear down better people to make himself look important." Kimmel's producers were now visible in the background, frantically signaling to their host, clearly wanting him to de-escalate the situation. But Kimmel, perhaps driven by ego or desperation, chose to dig in deeper. "You know what, Samuel? Maybe you're right. Maybe I should treat you with more respect. After all, it takes real talent to say the same lines in 50 different movies and convince people you're acting." The studio erupted in gasps and uncomfortable murmurs. Several audience members actually stood up, as if preparing to leave. This had crossed every line of acceptable television behavior, and everyone present knew they were witnessing something that would have serious consequences. Jackson's jaw clenched, and for a moment, the studio fell completely silent except for the hum of the cameras and lights. When he spoke again, his voice carried a dangerous quiet that made everyone lean in despite their discomfort. "You want to play this game, Jimmy? You want to question my talent? Let's talk about talent. Let's talk about the difference between someone who's earned their place in this industry and someone who got lucky telling jokes written by other people." Kimmel was sweating profusely now, clearly realizing he had pushed too far but seemingly unable to back down. "Hey, at least I don't have to rely on shouting and looking angry to carry every scene I'm in." The insult hung in the air like poison, and Jackson's entire demeanor shifted again. This wasn't just anger anymore. This was pure, concentrated fury from a man who had spent decades earning respect in one of the toughest industries in the world, only to be dismissed by someone he clearly viewed as beneath him. "You know what? The real joke is here, Jimmy." Jackson's voice was deadly calm now, more terrifying than if he had been screaming. "You sitting there, thinking you have the right to judge anyone's career. You who wouldn't last 5 minutes doing what I do. You who hides behind a desk and a team of writers because you couldn't handle a real conversation if your life depended on it." The audience was completely silent now, many people looking genuinely frightened by the intensity of the confrontation. This had gone far beyond uncomfortable television. This was personal, raw, and completely unprecedented. Kimmel made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Samuel, I think we should just agree to disagree here. Why don't we take a commercial break and—" "Don't you dare try to run away now," Jackson cut him off, his voice like thunder. "You wanted to embarrass me on your show? You wanted to make me look bad for your audience? Well, congratulations, Jimmy. You've succeeded in showing everyone exactly what kind of person you really are. The veteran actor's words carried the weight of absolute authority, and it was clear that this confrontation was about to reach its explosive climax. The studio crew stood frozen. The audience sat in stunned silence, and Jimmy Kimmel looked like a man who had just realized he had awakened something far more dangerous than he could handle. Jackson stepped back from the desk, his movements deliberate and controlled, like a predator circling wounded prey. You know what I've learned in 40 years in this business, Jimmy? I've learned to spot cowards. And right now, I'm looking at the biggest coward I've ever encountered on a stage. Kimmel's face went pale, beads of sweat now visible under the harsh studio lights. He gripped the arms of his chair as if they were the only things keeping him grounded. Samuel, please, let's just— No! Jackson's voice boomed across the studio, silencing not just Kimmel but every whisper from the audience. You don't get to please your way out of this. You brought me here with the intention of humiliating me, and now you're going to sit there and listen to what a real man has to say. The camera operators were capturing every moment. Their equipment, trained on both men as the most explosive television confrontation in history, reached its peak. Social media notifications were already pinging on phones throughout the audience as clips began spreading across the internet at lightning speed. Jackson's voice carried across the studio with the authority of someone who had commanded respect on movie sets around the world. You want to know the difference between us, Jimmy? When I walk onto a set, people listen because I've earned their respect through decades of hard work and professionalism. When you walk into this studio, people listen because they're being paid to. The insult hit Kimmel like a physical blow, and his composure finally cracked completely. You think you're so much better than everyone else, don't you, Samuel? You think because you've been in a bunch of movies, you're untouchable? Jackson's laugh was cold and cutting. Untouchable? No, Jimmy, I'm just better than you. And that's not arrogance talking. That's 40 years of facts. While you were learning how to read jokes off cue cards, I was learning how to be a professional. The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point. Audience members were shifting uncomfortably, some covering their faces in second-hand embarrassment for what they were witnessing. The crew members visible in the background looked like they wanted to disappear entirely. Kimmel made one final desperate attempt to regain control. You know what, Samuel? If you don't like how things work on my show, there's the door. Nobody's forcing you to be here. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Jackson's response came with the force of a thunderclap. You're absolutely right, Jimmy. Nobody is forcing me to be here, and I'm not going to waste another second of my life in the presence of someone who has so little respect for himself that he thinks tearing down others makes him look bigger. Jackson straightened his jacket with deliberate precision, his movements controlled and dignified despite the chaos around him. Let me tell you something about respect, Jimmy. It's not something you can fake with a smile and a comedy routine. It's something you earn through your actions, your character, and how you treat other people. The veteran actor's voice carried to every corner of the studio as he delivered what everyone knew would be his final words on the subject. Today, you've shown this audience and everyone watching at home exactly who you really are. A small man who thinks he can make himself look important by diminishing others. Well, congratulations. You've succeeded in showing everyone your true character. Kimmel sat frozen in his chair, his face a mixture of shock, anger, and what looked suspiciously like fear. The studio audience was completely silent, many people holding their breath as they witnessed something unprecedented in television history. Jackson took one final look around the studio, his gaze sweeping across the cameras, the crew, and the audience before settling back on Kimmel. I came here tonight thinking I was going to have a professional conversation with a fellow entertainer. Instead, I discovered I was dealing with someone who doesn't understand the first thing about professionalism or respect. The actor's words carried the weight of finality as he continued. Jimmy, you've built your career on the backs of people more talented than you'll ever be. Tonight you tried to add my name to that list, but unlike your usual guests, I don't need your show. I don't need your approval. And I certainly don't need to sit here and pretend this was anything other than a deliberate attempt to embarrass me." Jackson began walking toward the edge of the stage, his departure as controlled and dignified as everything else about his presence that evening. The cameras followed his every step as the audience watched in stunned silence. "You know what the real tragedy is here?" Jackson paused at the edge of the stage, turning back to face Kimmel one final time. "You could have had a real conversation tonight. You could have asked about my craft, my experiences, the things I've learned in 4 decades of working with some of the most talented people in the world. Instead, you chose to try to tear me down for a few cheap laughs." Kimmel finally found his voice, but it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Samuel, wait!" "No." Jackson's response was immediate and final. "I'm done waiting. I'm done pretending this was acceptable behavior. And I'm done giving you any more of my time." The veteran actor looked directly into the main camera, addressing the audience at home with the same intensity he had brought to his most memorable film roles. "To everyone watching this at home, remember what you saw here tonight. Remember how someone chose to treat a guest who came here in good faith. And remember that respect isn't negotiable. It's earned, and it can be lost in an instant." Jackson turned away from the cameras and walked toward the exit, with the same confident stride that had carried him onto the stage at the beginning of the evening. But now, instead of anticipation, there was an electric tension in the air as everyone in the studio processed what they had just witnessed. The sound of Jackson's footsteps echoed through the silent studio as he made his way to the exit. No music played, no announcer spoke. No attempt was made to lighten the mood or transition to commercial. The weight of what had transpired hung over the entire production like a storm cloud. As Jackson reached the exit, he paused for just a moment, not turning around but allowing his final words to carry across the studio one last time. "Jimmy, you might want to think about whether this is really the legacy you want to leave in this business, because after tonight, this is how people are going to remember you." With that, Samuel L. Jackson walked out of the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio, leaving behind a host who looked completely devastated, an audience in shock, and what would undoubtedly become the most talked-about television moment of the year. The cameras continued rolling, capturing Kimmel sitting alone at his desk, the weight of his actions finally sinking in as the reality of what he had just lost became clear. The studio remained silent for several long moments after Jackson's departure, the only sound being the quiet hum of the cameras and lights. Finally, a voice from the production booth called for commercial break, but the damage was already done. In less than 20 minutes, Jimmy Kimmel had managed to destroy his reputation and lose the respect of one of Hollywood's most revered actors, all in front of a live studio audience and millions of viewers at home. The confrontation was over, but its impact would resonate far beyond that studio, changing how people viewed both men and serving as a reminder that respect, once lost, is